Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Uh, got lots of stragglers, so I'm sure we'll be a few minutes until we get rolling here, but I want to thank you all. And so far, I'm seeing lots of familiar names, both here in Calgary, but out on the coast. We've got Ottawa contingent already on here too. Suburbs of Calgary as well, I suppose it should be added, but thanks for joining us, everybody. We'll get going momentarily. Now, if you've already started in on your whiskey calendar, I suppose it's no surprise. But if you haven't and you're trying to maintain that surprise, oh, that's not what I wanted to do. If you know, you can pre-pour your drams. We are going to go in order. Is that right, Evan? And you are muted, by the way.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, we will go in order for the whole
Yeah.
thing. So it won't be any surprises unless you're just opening the door with us as we're doing this.
So I'm going to open my doors because I haven't cracked mine yet. And I've done very little work on this year's calendar other than setting the ball in motion. Evan's been doing all the tasting notes, the blog posts. So kudos to him on that. And it's double duty this year. So yeah, it's going to kind of be a surprise. Other than that, I know what we picked. I just don't know where they
Yeah.
are in the box. So I'm expecting to have a little bit of fun as we go along here today. You might be able to tell from my voice that I'm not at 100%. I can smell and taste whiskey, but I have COVID. And as a result, I am not at my sharpest. So we'll be leaning on Evan, but also all of our friends in the chat to contribute tasting notes and things as we go along here tonight. And I did have a palate cleansing, again, while we're waiting for a handful more stragglers, because there we go, got another one trickling in. A palate cleansing Craigellachie from Whiskey Sponge with my dog Walter and I on the label. And it smelled especially funky tonight. I don't know if COVID has heightened my funk sensors and toned down some of the others, but it is especially cheesy, fruity, and funky tonight. So,
Yeah. Andrew, maybe you're the first one to have gained senses from COVID.
oh, that would be something, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
Maybe I'll exit COVID with a better nose than Sean. It's
that's
unlikely,
right.
but you could hope. There's always something to hope for. Well, we don't want to drag this out too long, especially since we're doing a second one of these at 8:30 for the other calendar edition we did. But really quickly, just a couple of quick plugs. We do have a couple more tastings left before the end of the year, in addition to the whiskey calendar tastings. We added some spots to the Ending with a Bang tasting, which features the Craigellachie I just showed you on the screen, amongst some others. That's coming up on Thursday. So if you're outside of Calgary, it might be tough to get kits for that tasting. This one here is a bit of a surprise. I thought there'd be more interest in it, but we've got a really baller Bowmore tasting coming up next Tuesday. It's not inexpensive. I'll be the first to admit that, but there's some pretty cool bottles in the tasting, including two editions of the Aston Martin, which I know I've said this before. I'm not a big fan of like cross promotions, but the first of those 22s, the second edition was quite good. And then a fun little Ben Romick tasting, because who doesn't love tasting Ben Romick, especially when you got a whole bunch of crazy new ones in. So those are some things that are coming up, and there's still some spots in them. And then later this week, we're going to be dropping our January and maybe a handful of February tastings, including our Burns Festival for those who are in town here. But we've also got a Glenfarclas family cask tasting that we're going to be putting on there, and a number of other cool things. So lots to look forward to. Anyway,
Yeah.
Whiskey Advent, day 5, but we got to backtrack to day 1. I can crack my calendar here and sort of make it official. Oh yeah, day 1. That makes sense that it would be in the middle this time, doesn't it? Because we've got the glass, the discount card. My discount card appears to have wandered, but that's all right. There we go, glass. And what have we got, Evan? We've got Daftmill, the Daftmill 15-year cask strength. So nice little start off with tonight. First time we've ever been able to put a Daftmill in the calendar.
Yeah, so for a bit of background on this, Andrew, of course, was a big part of the selection and the majority of the selection process for what went into the calendar, with input from myself and some of the other whiskey staff. And then as we were going on building them, well, as Harmony and Sammy and Co were building them whiskey staff wise, I went in and sort of selected the order based on trying to get sort of like a build up for every 5 days. Like we did last year, so that there was some sort of order that we wouldn't have to rejig for tastings like this. You'll have to tell me if I do well on that or at all or not. I did have a different number 1 picked, but then Andrew reminded me that we always try and sort of set the tone with whiskey number 1. We've done a Millstone Rye in the past and a few others, but this is why we're starting at a high strength Daftmill this time.
Yeah, well, we like to put something out there that, you know, maybe a big portion of people won't have tried before, or that'll be a bit surprising, something that they weren't expecting. And yeah, I think this is a great one to start with, but it's also a fairly approachable whiskey, even at cask strength. I believe it was 100% ex bourbon. So, or am I right on that?
Yeah, 100% first fill ex bourbon.
So, I mean, that's a nice approachable style of whiskey. It's a lowland style, unpeated, you know, malt forward. Yeah, and it's nosing quite nicely just to start off with. And you know, there's a story behind this, which we won't get to tonight, but we decided to mix things up with the calendar this year because we really wanted to be able to feature the sort of things we've never had before, the things that we could never get in 50 ml bottles. And, you know, we'll see how that goes down overall in the end. But I mean, I know that we're kind of excited about the lineup that we have this time around for that very reason.
Yeah, we've been very lucky in the past 9 calendars that we've done where we have had a lot of different distilleries and distributors and companies work for us or with us in sourcing mini bottles that we couldn't get otherwise. But being able to actually pour our own, like really open things up. And made the selection process a lot more interesting too. It was the world was our oyster for putting this calendar together because of that.
Yeah, and while it is definitely Scotch heavy, really it gave us the chance to pick things that we were excited about and that we really wanted to talk and educate people about, because oftentimes the brands that end up in smaller format bottles like 50 mils are not the most interesting. They just happen to be the biggest.
Yeah, as Jen puts it, one thing different right from the start is the tiny Glencairn glass. That was one of the sacrifices we had to make with the smaller box size. Is the full size Glencairn glass. There wasn't a good way of putting it in there that we could figure out at least.
No, and this will surprise people. Those small Glencairn glasses cost us the exact same amount as the regular sized one. I'm guessing it's more expensive to make the little ones. Maybe that's the logic behind it, but I don't know. I mean, it's pocket size. Think of it this way. It's a travel sized little whiskey glass. Like, you know, you could take that places where you're not supposed to and pour yourself a dram and probably not get noticed.
That's right. We should have sold it as Kensington Wine Market's way of striving towards being carbon neutral, where we're eventually that like next year's glass is even going to be smaller than that. And eventually there will be no footprint to this calendar at all.
There you go. Well, that would mean no calendar, I think, unless we were encouraging you to plant it in your garden and then a tree would grow in its place, perhaps.
That's right. One day.
So back to the Daftmill. For those who don't know, Daftmill is an interesting little distillery. It's a farm distillery owned by the Cuthbert family. The farm itself has existed for almost 1,000 years. It's been growing barley for a very long time. The Cuthberts were producing barley for the Scotch whiskey industry. In the early 2000s, they got frustrated by the price of barley. And one of the brothers, Francis, decided to, hey, why not make our own whiskey? We can take the barley we're growing and add value to it rather than just selling it all to the industry and have to accept in some years very lean prices on it. So that's why they decided to start making whiskey. And it's a relatively new distillery as far as people being aware of it, but the distillery actually dates to 2005. It's the same vintage as Kilchoman. It's just that they decided not to sell any of their whiskey until it was at least 12 years of age. It is truly tiny in terms of production. I believe about 20 to 30,000 liters per annum is the most they ever produce. And it's dictated by the seasons. Francis makes whiskey when he's not farming, typically twice a year. So at most, the distillery is operating about 6 months a year, but only really operated by one man. And occasionally his daughter, who seemed rather embarrassed when I drove up to the distillery, and she was helping him push some casks around. So it's a very small operation. We're the only retailer in Canada that's had access to them so far, and we're certainly grateful for that opportunity.
Yeah, it's such a cool story, and it's a kind of whiskey story that everybody dreams every single distillery is going to be about, but which obviously isn't the case. Most of these are more corporate and commercial concerns, rightfully so. You want to make money off them, but the running it as almost as a hobby in a way is a crazy way to go about it, because there's a lot of work to do when it comes to making whiskey.
Oh, and the guy who makes it, I mean, he's crazy. I think he works like 16-hour days distilling, because he doesn't cut corners. He does everything, as precisely as he possibly can. He is the antithesis of those guys who go out there and open distilleries with the dream of being bought out. I mean, we all know, a few examples of who I'm talking about. This is the guy who's got no desire to be bought out. He's making whiskey because he wants to, and he loves it. And maybe he's a little bit crazy, but how can you not just like fall in love with that sort of, blind, love for what you're doing? And like basically an absolutely, like he doesn't care if people don't think he's doing things right or well. He's doing them how he's going to do them. He's going to do them better if he can, but he's not going to change. I mean, it's incredible. So my only fear, although he's not much older than I am, is that he's one of those guys whose dream will die with him, because like, who will be there to carry it forward afterwards? But incredible figure. So 15-year-old cask strength. It's creamy, malty, some nice soft fruits coming in there, honey.
Yeah, the barley notes on it are just fantastic. Like it's the maltiness of it and just the authenticity of the grain that just sings through is just crazy.
And on the palate, like for cask strength, it's incredibly approachable. No rough edges. Soft, toasty, some nutty tones coming in, loads of honey, more fruit. It reminds me of like how he does everything. This Francis Cuthbert, like he'll go to pick up casks with his horse trailer because he's a farmer and he's practical. So he'll only take as many casks as he can fit in his horse trailer at a time. I think the guys at the Speyside cooperage, but it's not the one in the Speyside. It's actually down on the coast, not far from St. Andrews, from what I understand. They call him when they get new casks, and they kind of let him wander around and pick whichever ones he wants, because their other customers are buying in such big volumes. They don't care. Like, I think he literally noses every cask before he takes it and wheels it into his horse trailer and drives away.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So not that we're trying to push more whiskey on you, but we do actually have 2 Daftmill releases right now. We did just recently get another one in. One of the if you look on whiskyfund.com, who tend to be big fans of Daftmill, I think the 15 got 89 points or something. Most of everything they've released has gotten around 89 or 90. One of the sort of like caveats to the 15 that was mentioned on the whiskyfund.com site is that it was all first fill ex bourbon, if I remember correctly, and that the wood kind of takes over. I don't necessarily see it in that. I think this still has a lot of grain notes and a lot of fruit notes coming through as well. But if you want something with a slightly lighter edge to it when it comes to the oak, the 2010 winter batch release that we got in, that 46% alcohol, is very, very good as well.
Yeah, I mean, you can see it does have a little bit of that. There's a little bit of a piney, woody tone coming in on the finish, but it's not overly oaked at all. I saw someone there asking if his daughter's married, which brings up a funny story. No, but also I do not believe she's of marrying age yet. She appeared to be a teenager. I'm not sure where on the spectrum, but a teenager nonetheless. I remember when I was over in Scotland with a friend of mine, Stevie Boy, who did have a daughter, and I remember he was like buttering up Stuart Lang from, at that time it was Douglas Lang. It was before Stuart left to start Hunter Lang with his sons. Stuart is, as a alluding there, has two sons, and Stevie Boy was chatting him up, said he has a beautiful daughter, which is true. He absolutely has a beautiful daughter. And we gave them this little book about Calgary when we left, and Stevie Boy signed it to him, "Your future son-in-law, Stevie Boy," and he left a photo of his daughter in the book, which was hilarious. Classic.
Yeah.
Any other comments on this one, Evan? Any other thoughts?
Yeah, so Tom and Vi say nice oily finish, olive oil on the nose. Totally agree on that. Chris is mentioning the 2010 winter batch, says he tried both. Prefers this one quite a bit. I actually like the lighter version, the 2010, at least when I tried them side by side at a whiskey festival, but both are excellent. And if this is a sign of Daftmill at 15 years old, can't wait to see older releases from them. Because, yeah, just great stuff.
Well, Kilholman's got a 16-year-old coming out.
Yep.
Which I tried in Paris. So Daftmill's got to have something close to that too. I mean, in theory, 2005, Daftmill has probably got 18-year-old whiskey somewhere. Whether we'll see an 18-year-old whiskey remains to be seen. But shall we to door number 2?
Yeah, let's go on to door number 2.
All right. So I crack open my box here for you all and see what's in there. What have we got? Boutique Teaninich 12-year batch 6. It's kind of fun to have Boutique in the calendar again. We're big fans of their products, and we know not everyone's a big fan of the 500 ml bottles, but they still come up with some pretty lovely drams. And I haven't tried this one yet, Evan. So you're gonna have to tell us.
Yeah, so unfortunately, we don't have a bottle shot up of it yet. But this is the Boutique 10-year-old batch 6 or 12-year-old batch 6. We had a 10-year-old of it in last year's calendar, and I think it appeared around day 4 or 5 in the 2022 whiskey calendar, and it ended up being one of my top 5 favorites personally of that entire operation. So I was super excited when we had to see we had another Teaninich from Boutique in here. This one, I believe, goes a little bit more ex-sherry cask driven. It's apparently a marriage of 2 refill sherry butts that were finished in a ex-bourbon barrel, which math-wise seems a little bit quirky. But this one's a lot higher alcohol this time around, about 10% higher than the last one. Last year's was 49.7 or something like this one. This one is 59.1. But yeah, I love Teaninich, and not just because of last year's dram. It's a distillery that's kind of been on my radar for a year or two now, thanks to Scotch Malt Whisky Society releases and other independent bottling releases, since we don't get any actual Teaninich in single malt form, official bottling wise.
There's quite a yogurt note coming off the nose, unless it's my COVID, and a German retailer has the bottle shot that we need for tonight, so we'll steal from them. Yeah. And this is a story where I think I think we've shared it before, where it's something to do with somebody goes blind or something and he's in love with a woman, or they always have like stories. There's always stories with these bottlings.
That's right.
But yeah, the yogurt.
Yeah, when Boutique eventually does a Daftmill release, it'll be a teenage daughter pushing barrels across the field.
It might be, yeah.
Yeah.
So what are we getting in addition to the yogurt? I'm getting kind of honey, barley.
Honey and barley for sure. Lemon notes with that yogurt for me. I even mentioned lemon scented furniture polish on this one. Wine gums, honeydew.
Would that be Murphy's lemon oil soap? Which
could be. I was thinking more like a watered down version of Lemon Pledge, but that works for me.
Well, I don't know if you remember it, but there was that great commercial with like the old ladies cleaning the church, and it's like, if it's good enough for our house, surely it's good enough for yours.
No, I don't remember that one. That sounds like a good commercial.
Someone else there must remember that. Yeah.
Tom and Vi mentioned number 2 has black pepper on the nose. I can see that.
It's like cupcakey, like sort of slightly stale white cupcakes.
There's a little bit of I mentioned strawberry rhubarb pie. There's that light hint of like macerated or mashed up strawberries in the background there for me.
I do love a good strawberry rhubarb pie. Emphasis on the rhubarb. The palate is going to like sauteed carrots and turnips.
Hmm.
Like a nice like glazed like root vegetable note coming off of it.
Yeah, I can see where you're going with that. Still great cereal notes as well.
Mhm.
Um, even Cheerios and milk for me right now.
Cheerios and milk. To me, it's the Jelly Modern Donuts carrot cake donut, which is sort of a
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you've had one of those before, but it's interesting when you take carrot cake batter and fry it. You get an interesting effect there. So
Mm-hmm.
digging that. One of the interesting things about Teaninich is I believe until recently it was one of the only distilleries in Scotland with a mash filter, which
Yeah.
is the same piece of equipment that Waterford Distillery has in Ireland, not by choice, but because it was a Guinness brewery that they bought and it was state of the art technology. But it means they have a very clear wort before it goes into fermentation.
Yeah.
And some people believe that's one of the reasons for Teaninich's profile.
Hmm. Yeah, and profile wise, Teaninich tends to have this sort of grassy, waxy bent to it. I tend to get a lot of sort of just slightly unripe tropical fruit on a lot of Teaninich that I've had that I've always enjoyed as well. It's a little bit more on the 10-year-old that we had last year, if I remember correctly, versus this one. This one's a little bit more ripe and orchard fruit driven.
Mhm.
But I love this dram. Like it's got more weight to it
Mhm.
than last year's. It's a little bit richer, but still incredibly well balanced.
And yet it's still rather naked. Like this is not
Yeah.
an overly oak. This is still very spirit driven. I think you're bang on. I think those sort of underripe tropical tones are there. I think those
Hmm.
uh, glazed root vegetables are kind of more dominant, but uh,
Hmm.
they're they're present, and yeah, it's quite tasty.
One of the surprising things about Teaninich too is its size. You would expect it would be a small distillery versus compared to others because we don't see any official bottlings of it, but they produce like 10.2 million liters a year of spirit. They're, I think, the second or third largest in Diageo's portfolio,
Mhm.
and one of the larger distilleries in Scotland operating right now. But that's because most of what Teaninich produces is for Johnny Walker and other blends such as that.
Peter was chiming in that it was indeed Murphy's oil soap. Um, and yeah, I've, you know, I don't have a lot of wood in my home, so I don't have a lot of need to polish wood. But this does have like that sort of polished, varnished wood sort
Yeah.
of note to it too. But interesting that yogurt note on the nose seems to have blown off. I'm not
Yeah.
really getting it as much anymore.
The lemon notes there, but it's gone even more into lemongrass for me,
Hmm.
like something just a hint more sharp.
Very well.
Hmm.
Shall we crack another door here?
Yeah, let's go for it.
All right, door number 3. I got to locate it first. The green numbering system, although the colors work well, are sort of camouflaged, or at least maybe highlighting spot where my eyes aren't working as well as maybe they should. We are on to the Berry Brothers and Rudd Perspectives 21-year blended Scotch whiskey.
Hmm.
I know we shouldn't probably give away teasers, but this may or may not be the only blend in the calendar this year. It,
We'll
and,
see.
and if it is, does that matter? I mean, we included it because it's a fun blend. It's one that we actually had years ago, sold out
Yeah.
of, and then we were offered a better price to move a little more of it, shall we say, which worked well for us because I think it's a nice quality blend, and it's always nice to have something on the blended front that adds a bit of quality and character. Plus, the folks we get this from are the ones that we get Daftmill from, so we want to make sure we keep them happy and are supporting some of their other brands. So this is from Berry Brothers
Hmm.
and Rudd, the London wine merchants. And it was part of a series of 4 blends they released a few years back. Evan, what do we know about this other than it's 46%?
43%, I believe, isn't it?
What's 43? Oh,
Yeah.
43.
Yeah, so 43%.
Fine.
It was part, the Perspective series was something done by Berry Brothers and Rudd in 2019, I think. There was a 25-year-old, a 35-year-old as well, and we got both of those. And then there was a 40-year-old, which was beyond what we received, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. Which is true and also unfortunate because it was probably that same parcel of stock that our 40-year-old Barry
KWM 40.
brothers have come from previously. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, I think it was kind of an afterthought. We do have some cool stuff coming from them not too long from now, though. We've got a 1979 blended malt coming in from Barry Brothers and Rudd that I'm pretty excited
Oh,
about.
well,
Plus,
they've been very, very good to us because we have multiple single casts from them right now as well.
we do it. Well, and we've got a 1997 Bowmore coming from them as well that was balled for us as an exclusive cask. Sort of a similar situation to our Bladnock cast from G&M. It's a very small outturn, but very cool to see a Bowmore single cask in that like 24, 25 year range. It's quite rich on the nose.
It is.
Chocolatey, spicy.
Yeah, lots of sort of purple fruit notes for me right now, going a little bit more into grapes and raisins, but
Little hubba bubba.
yeah, a hint of peat in there as well. You get just a dash of the grain coming through.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. You can tell there's grain in this, but like it doesn't nose like a blend right off the bat for me.
Not at all.
And it is
No,
moving
Tom and
at old school sort of sherry notes.
yeah, Tom and Vi mentioned slight hint of earthy smoke caramel. Tobacco leaf is something that comes out for me on this one. Touch of chocolate on the palate, Chris says.
Mhm. It's very approachable. Nice caramel, chocolate. As you're saying, a little bit of nice light smoke, a touch of salt. Yeah, it's got a nice balance to it.
Yeah, really well balanced stuff. 43% alcohol again. I think it works at that ABV too. Like it would be cool to see something higher, but it's not like going to be the most robust whiskey in the world, but this is a whiskey that you could pull out at any time.
No, it's got a nice richness to it. And as I was saying before, I mean, the sherry tones that are coming off of it are kind of feel like more like those old school sherry tones.
Totally.
Yeah, this tastes like an older school blend, like something that was made pre, whiskey industry going crazy in the 2000s, back when a lot of companies cared more about what they're making. It reminds me a little bit of like that Dewar's double range, the 21 and the 27 stylistically.
Tom and Vi agree with you that Tom says reminds him of what blends used to be like in the late 70s and early 80s. Jen says Noah's is my grandfather's workshop. And Chris says great blend to introduce friends to whiskey. Totally agree with all those points. I love when whiskeys kind of like take you on a tour through your own memories. That's one of the best parts of this type of thing.
Yeah. Adam chiming in on that, saying 70s, 80s workshop for sure. Definitely the tobacco. I'm wondering if there was a lot of like old blended whiskey in these workshops as well that,
Yeah.
the hours. I mean, I'm sure Ron Swanson has whiskey in his workshop, so I have to imagine a lot of these other chaps would too.
That's right. Yeah, that is just really nicely put together. Zach says cedar forest is what he gets. I can see where you're going with that, especially the spiciness on the finish. It's coming out really nicely for me.
So one of the things that I always like to talk about when we talk about something like this Barry's Perspective blend is their relationship with other companies in the industry. Barry Brothers and Rudd for the longest time had their own blend. They actually owned the Cutty Sark blend. So if you've ever had Cutty Sark before, for up until I think about 3-4 years ago, Cutty Sark was part of the Barry Brothers stable. They acquired in, I believe, the early 90s, the rights to the brand Glenrothes. And so even though they didn't own the distillery, they owned the right to sell Glenrothes in those round little bottles. They were usually a vintage dated bottle. And for about 30 years, Barry Brothers and Rudd were the retailers of Glenrothes. And that's part of the Edrington group. So Macallan, Highland Park. They used to have Glen Turretal. They've sold it off. And if you think about the relationships they've had historically, and the whiskeys that they would have at their disposal to put into products like this, you're going to start thinking like Glenrothes, Highland Park, Macallan, at a certain point, Glengoyne, Tamdhu as well, although they traded those. So it's always kind of fun to think about that, because you're getting oftentimes in a lot of the berries bottlings we've had, including that 40-year-old, which, we felt sort of tasted like old Macallan. Was probably a high proportion of old Macallan in it, but all of these whiskeys would get blended or married into like with each other and then left to further mature, and they could never be reconstituted as a single malt. And companies like Barry's would acquire these and then put them into their own blends.
Yeah, Chris saying he has fond memories of that 40-year-old blend. That was, yeah, that bottle was just a fantastic bottle.
Yeah, definitely wish we could get more 40-year-old blended whiskey that tasted like Macallan, but that ship has sailed, sadly. Are we
on
ready
to 4?
All right, window number 4 is where? Second row. All right. Well, it's a stubborn window, this one. Try to open it without completely destroying the box. There we go. What have we got? Oh, Gord MacPhail. Distillery labels Glentauchers 2000, 46%. So it's been a while since we've had a Gord MacPhail bottling in the whiskey calendar. I think exactly how long, but it's got to be at least 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, I feel like it would have been probably 2018 or 2019 where you had a slew of the Connoisseur's Choice labels in there.
Yeah, and that was, I think we didn't appreciate it at the time, but that was literally like sort of a final hurrah, because they started to rebrand shortly thereafter. It was probably why they wanted to get as much of that old stock out of their possession and into the world as possible.
There's stuff from there that I would love to revisit that I wish I'd gotten bottles of. Like there was a 25-year-old Glen Scotia, if I remember correctly, and I think a 12 or 13-year-old Lacheg as well, and a really good Kalila.
Those were different times, as we've said before, innocent times.
Absolutely.
I was looking back on something today. Somebody commented on one of my posts on Instagram from 2017, and I think it was, we had a shipment of Brora come in. And I think my comment was, this might be the last 6-pack of Brora we ever see, and it probably was. And the guy's question was, how much? But it was like, he asked the question literally yesterday. So I wrote him back. I said $22.50 plus GST circa 6 years ago, but that's long gone.
Yeah, so, plus the DeLorean.
Yeah.
And then that'll get you it.
Yeah.
This one really intrigued me.
Smuggle you along, like you can do that and maybe make some bets. But anyway, sorry, Evan, you were saying?
All good. So this one really intrigued me. So the Distillery label collection now from GNM, it used to be at 43% alcohol. I think it's 46% alcohol straight across the board almost.
Yep.
Which is cool to see. Glentauchers is not one of the distillery labels that I remember having before, although we have seen it in the shop in my time. But this did not go the way I expected the Glentauchers to go, where it's going in a little bit more of a sherry-driven style than the orchard fruits I was expecting to get.
Yeah, no, but it's interesting because even though it's clearly sherry, a very soft approach to it. Lots of like burnt, like sort of browning apple, bit of soft pear. On top of those sort of darker, richer sherry tones. Like the sherry's there, but it's not overly dominant.
Yeah, I agree. And it's got these great spice notes that come through with it as well.
And Evan, can you put that back up on screen for a minute? And like,
sure,
man, the palette on that is stunning. This is a beautiful, very well put together bottling. If you want light, subtle sherry, complex, fruity, at a young age, but like, let's just stop and talk and pause for a second on the price. $105. Like, how do we even have this? How is this not
Yeah.
sold out instantly the second it hits our shelves? Like, the price on this is superb. The quality of the liquid is excellent.
Yeah, it's a fantastic little whiskey, and I think it's actually showing better for me. So I did crack mine to do the tasting notes up. And to be perfectly honest, I have to go back and revisit those because I'm not sure I'm super happy with them. But it's gotten more expressive since it's gone down the bottle a little bit, even in the tiny sample bottles that we have for this. Much more sherry than I recall, tons of toffee and butterscotch notes. This great hint of coffee to it as well that I'm really enjoying.
All right. It's got like a nice sort of eat more hint to it.
Mhm.
Like dried and like even mulled fruit. Some nice spices and sugars. It's a fun bottling. It's got a really nice balance to it. And this is a hell of a dram for $105 a bottle.
No kidding. So Steve C does mention mild notes of licorice, bacon, and sulfur. I do get a bit of that sulfur myself. It's got this sort of like meaty, spicy note, which I do not mind. I think it works really, really well with it. Chris says this is really tasty. Second favorite of the evening so far.
I would have thought that Chris would have been making his usual joke with that. This is easily his fourth favorite whiskey of the tasting so far.
That's right. That's right.
I'm not getting the sulfur, though. It could be my nose. I do get a bit of a meatiness from it.
Mm-hmm. Clint had a good note there. Clint Delisle says a whiskey flavored DQ banana split.
I think
Zach prefers it with water.
I think DQ might need to get a liquor license, and then they could start experimenting with that. Definitely not opposed. I do enjoy the odd DQ frozen treat. Man, I went back for a second. I was going to say, I want to see how the others are nosing, and that Daftmill is just so bright and fruity now.
Oh, no kidding.
I know. I mean, the others like the berries and the boutique are still showing well, but yeah, it's amazing. The Daftmill and that Glentauchers are really sort of jumping out of the glass by comparison.
Yeah, the Daftmill has more and more of this chalkiness that comes on along with this floral and fruit note as well on the nose.
Yeah. If you want like a cool contrast bottling to this, we actually have our own Glentauchers cask at the moment. We have a 2007, I believe. Is it 2007? No, it's 2006. We have a 2006 Glentauchers cask. It's a 16-year-old that came in not too long ago.
Yeah, I'll pull that up.
Okay. And bourbon cask, so quite different from this. You know, more on that sort of orchard fruit, citrus fruit style of things. Prominent barley note, which I think the sherry is hiding here. For those of you who aren't familiar with Glentauchers, it's part of the trio of distilleries that are the Ballantyne's blends, or the Ballantyne's blend, along with Glenbergie and Milton Duff. Three distilleries we're all very fond of, which are sadly not really focused on by their parent company, Pernod Ricard. But in the end, we say that maybe it's for the best that Pernod doesn't lavish any attention on those distilleries, because maybe we wouldn't get so many good independent bottlings of Glentauchers if that was the case. Yeah, there you go. Our new Glentauchers cask. This one kind of crept in under the radar, but a great as well for cask strength, $150. But again, for dollars, like just pure value, I'm just blown away by this 2000 Glentauchers.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting what you say, and we've talked about that with Pernod Ricard and Diageo. I mentioned it with Teaninich as well, how they have these workhorse distilleries that just churn out whiskey for blends. But this is a great thing about independent bottlings, and you'll probably see that's well, everybody that shops with us knows that's a big focus for us at Kensington Wine Market. It probably will continue to be a focus and theme for the whiskey calendar, but we'll just have to wait and see as we go forward.
I did want to add a little bit about Gordon MacPhail, especially since we haven't had a chance to talk about them for quite some time now. They are, at least in my opinion, one of if not the most interesting company in the Scotch whiskey industry. And the reason I say that is they've had the foresight to lay whiskey down for 8 decades. No one else has really thought about this. If you've ever seen like Macallan or Glen Grant release an 80-year-old or 70-year-old whiskey, those are whiskeys they bought back from Gordon MacPhail. But what's really, really interesting to me about Gordon MacPhail is what they do with the whiskeys they put into wood, because this Glentauchers would not be Glentauchers that they bought in a cask from the distillery. It would have been spirit that they bought as new make, filled themselves. And I really think that they have the best oak policy. A lot of people talk about this, but I think Gordon MacPhail really, and Gordon MacPhail, they're too gentlemanly. They wouldn't tell you they have the best oak policy. They'll just tell you what that policy is. And when you measure it up against everyone else's, you're like, no one's coming close to this. And sadly, some of you may have seen a note, but earlier this year, they announced that they were going to stop filling their own spirit, doing these own fillings at distilleries, which is sad until you realize that they've still got 15 more years of 15-year-old whiskeys they can bottle. And knowing that they age things to much greater ages, there's a lot more old stuff like that out there. But when you see what they've done with their Benromic distillery, the new distillery, the Cairn, it's such a fascinating company. I kind of hope that they'll reverse course on the whole independent bottling side of things when the industry comes back to its senses and realizes that they need companies like Gordon MacPhail to get the lean years. But even if they don't, what they're doing with Benromic is incredible. And yeah, I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find many distilleries putting out something as good as that at $105 a bottle.
Yeah, and we've had numerous bottles like this. Like I remember a 10-year-old Glen Grant that we had 5 or 6 years ago from G&M. That was just fantastic and really well priced. And then around the same time, there was it a Glenbergie or something else as well?
We had a 10-year-old Milton Duff as well.
That's right. That Milton Duff was so tropical. It was great stuff.
Yeah. So they put out a lot of great whiskey. I think that they've in some ways highlighted a lot of best practice that I hope a lot of companies will take to heart and maybe put their own twist on. But incredible company. Well, we've got one last dram, Evan, for the and then we can do questions or go back. I know there's a poll. People get to vote on their favorite, but
absolutely.
I'm going to pop open window number 5 here. Try to leave the box intact so it still looks pretty. What have we got? Amrut 9-year KWM port pipe. So one of the things that's cool about this year's edition is we were able to put in a few of our casks. So this is our new Amrut cask that came in. We selected this last fall with our friend Ashik when he was in town. Came by the distillery, or came by the shop rather. And this is a bit of an interesting one because we've never bottled a port cask before.
Yeah, it's really cool. I mean, the age is crazy on it, considering Greedy Angels is released at 10 and sometimes 8, depending on the release. But yeah, this isn't actually the first peated port pipe that's been released as a single cask. Someone else did do one before us, an importer, if I remember correctly. But this is just a big, chewy whiskey that it's kind of a creation that only Amrut would create and could create, which is what I really enjoy about it.
And this one is peated, Evan?
Yeah.
Cool. I'm just doing my quick take a photo before I forget moment. It's got some
at least
great
if it's not peated, I'm shocked, but I believe it was even said that by Ashik.
The nose on it, it's very chocolatey, lots of like blueberry, acai berry notes coming through. There's definitely some leather and a bit of tobacco. It's got a mustiness to it too.
Yeah, I love that sort of bitter dark chocolate note that you get in there on the nose. It reminds me of Like it's going into the realm of a really good Amaro for me on the nose.
Mhm. The palate on it, underneath, you're starting to see these tropical tones come through. So you get that chocolatiness of the port cask, the spices, some of those candied fruits, the
Mhm.
chocolate. But then underneath that, there's some nice, like subtle, but starting to flower little tropical tones that are starting to pop up.
Yeah, it's got that crazy cool dichotomy that only certain whiskeys can get. Uh, Super big and chewy, but still so approachable. And I think we've talked about it with Amrut before, but it still bears mentioning that this is at 60% alcohol, and that is not cask strength.
Yeah, that's right. You know, Evan, your comment on the smoke is the peat is an interesting one because I didn't really get any until the finish.
Mhm.
I think I'm getting it on there, but uh, I don't exactly trust my palate right now. So
Well,
uh,
I could be wrong, and I swear this was a peated one, but maybe there's something to it not being peated, because there's so much port, and that smokiness could be barrel char. It's just so big and chewy that it's hard to tell.
well, I remember, so the one you were talking about before, the only
Hmm.
reason why I would suspect it might not be is I'm pretty sure they would have put peated port on the bottle and tube if it
That's a
was.
good point.
But yeah, the one you were talking about was the cask that was selected by our late friend Jay Wheelock,
Yeah, the
which
Bengal
was just,
Tiger.
yeah, it was just a beast. It was this big peated port pipe. Well, there's the Bengal Tiger, and then there was the peated port, uh,
Gotcha.
which stuck around for a little while. Um, I wanted to sort of address because Peter made the comment about a bit of damp funkiness. I mean,
Hmm.
this has definitely got a mustiness to it on the nose and palate, and that is 100% coming from the port casks. But I think it's important to know what those port casks are before to get an understanding of where that's coming from.
Hmm.
And the reason I say that is that most of what the Scotch whiskey industry uses as port casks, I think, are like ruby port casks. They tend to be very young ports. They tend to be they're drank. They're inexpensive. They're probably in the wood for 6 months to a year at most. This is probably in a tawny port cask. And the interesting thing there with tawny port casks is that the port quintas don't replace barrels. They
Hmm.
replace staves. And some of these casks could be 100 years old. Some of the staves could be even older. They don't replace the cask when it's leaking. They replace the stave that's leaking, and then they keep the cask there. And the reason they do that is, at least for tawny ports, they don't want any oak impact on the wine. All they're looking for is a vessel for oxidation. So these things sit in these earthen floor, essentially the port equivalent of a dunnage warehouse, and they mature away in some cases for decades. We recently had a port in the store, a port tasting in the store with an 80-year-old port. Um,
Hmm.
Port wines have been matured in these casks for up to 80 or 100 years. And I think that's what this is it's either a tawny cask or a colheita cask. And
Hmm.
that's what you're getting. You're getting a cask that's not got a lot of, oak character. You're getting a bit of that wine character coming through, but you're also getting that sort of earthy, musty character of a cask that's been sitting in a warehouse for decades.
That's a good point. And going to the nose and the palate right now, there's, along with that mustiness, that sort of almost hyper bitterness to the chocolate note that they had there. This really reminds me of, like, if you've ever had a chance to try, and Andrew has, of course, and some of you will have as well. But when you get into like Gordon and MacPhail casks, where they had them from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, where it's that hyper rich sherry that's super dark, and you get those bitter chocolate notes on those as well, in a similar fashion to this.
Mhm. For me, like the chocolate notes are kind of tinged with like a hot spice, like
Hmm.
a cayenne pepper or something creeping in.
Yeah, I can see that. There's almost like a mulled apple cider note to it in there for me as well.
Mhm. Yeah, it's got quite a nice spiciness to it. Well, what are we going to do here, Evan? Are we going to go back back across the range one more time and
Yeah, we might as well. And unfortunately, a lot of mine are empty at this point, just because I had to sacrifice half of it for tasting notes. But
right,
happy to nose the glass again. Back to the Daftmill.
back to the Daftmill.
Still so fruity. So much grain.
Yeah, it's really bright, creamy. Palate's got a nice toastiness to it.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of malt. Yeah, it's a lovely start.
Teaninich a little bit softer versus the Amrut, of course, and then the Daftmill right now. A little bit of tapioca there for me. Custard.
Yeah, on the palate, bright. It's got a nice minerality to it. Berry fruits, a bit of that yogurty creaminess sticking around as well. Yeah, it's not a complicated dram, but it's a nice, bright, refreshing one.
Absolutely.
I remember my friend Sam, who's the head of whiskey at Boutique, rather than gin and tonic, he likes to do whiskey and tonic. And I actually think this would probably be a good whiskey and tonic dram. Not suggesting that that's a reason to buy it, but I think it would be a very refreshing.
Yeah, I could see the grassy and minerality notes to going with quinine pretty good. The berries right now, there's so much smoke all of a sudden on the nose after those last ones for me.
Yeah, I can see that.
It's like a pipe tobacco smoke coming through, wafting around for me. A little bit coastal still.
And like a fancy caramel bar. So not your, gas station equivalent, something a little higher end.
Yeah, it's a caramel bar that actually gives you the percentage of cocoa on the side.
Yeah, possibly fair trade.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the palate's a little light. I think it sort of loses some of its oomph on the palate, but still very pleasant.
Agreed.
Nice. Okay. Glentauchers.
Well, that nose is dried apricots right now for me. Some peach slices in there as well. Golden raisins.
Oh, yeah. Great dram, showing really well. Great value. That's a nice one. I'm really just I just love the drinkability on that. I think that's a whiskey that you could session that whiskey. Amrut port pipe. I mean, this in some ways this is just drowning out the rest of the lineup because it's just so big and so thick and so rich.
Yeah, there's no way, and we'll have to see at the end of the calendar, but I don't think there's anything in the calendar that could have gone after this in the lineup. Maybe if we have our Barry's Tobermory in here somewhere, but even that would be pushing it.
Yeah, which we don't. The palate just big and spicy. So Evan started talking about this, but he just mentioned how this is not cask strength. It's bottled at 60%, and there's a reason for it. There's an excise tax on Indian whiskey that's over 60%, even for exporting it out of the country. That would mean that the price of this product would more than, like, at least the taxing on it would more than double. So anytime Amrut bottles something that's going to be above 60%, they dilute it down to 60% just for bottling. To save us all a little bit of money, because otherwise the Indian government takes a bigger chunk of it. So that's the reasoning why. Peter is commending you on the order of the drams tonight, Evan. So well done.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. It's probably all downhill from here, but
a certain amount of that too would have been guesswork, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, there are. Of the whiskeys we tried tonight, I mean, I tried the berries before, but essentially it was the Daftmill and the Amrut that I was most familiar with. The Glentauchers I hadn't tried yet. This boutique Teaninich I hadn't tried yet, but yeah, I'm learning as I do the Scotch Malt Whisky Society tastings that there's more than one way to skin a cat, proverbially, when it comes to putting a lineup together.
As my high school math teacher called that, he'd say, "There's more than one way to skin this kitty," and he said it in a Dutch accent, which somehow made it menacing.
Menacing or like dangerously close to being a pedophile, it sounds like.
Well, I don't know. Maybe that's just the way his accent came across, or my poor interpretation of it. So, I do a much better Russian accent than a Dutch accent, to be sure.
Fair enough.
Can we fire up the poll there, Evan?
Yeah, I'll launch it now. So this is your chance to pick your two favorites from the first of the order of 5 for the run of visuals that we'll do here.
Now, if you're a couple, unfortunately, you have to share. Or you can, I guess, arm wrestle. That would be fun to watch. Just let us know if you're going to arm wrestle. Evan, while everybody's voting, and a good chunk of the votes are in, so it's probably safe at this point that we're not going to skew the results. What were your favorites tonight?
It's a toughie. I really enjoyed everything in the lineup there. I'm going to go with the boutique Teaninich. I had high hopes for that one, and I feel like it lived up to my expectations easily. So really happy with that. And it's tough between the Daftmill and the Amrut, but I'm going to go with the Amrut this time around. I just love how completely over the top and completely drinkable that one is at the same time. How about you?
Well, I'm just narrowing it down here because I thought I had my lineup picked.
I was gonna say I feel like the Glentauchers is gonna be in here justifiably. So
you know what? It's on the edge. It's in my number 3, and it's in my number 3 because as good as it is, the Daftmill and the Amrut just knock it out of place.
cool.
My number 2 is the Daftmill. I think it's a great bottling, great strength, lots of character, lots of fruit. It's not rough, it's not sharp. So I really think that one's an impressive dram. But I'm going to go out here and say that the Amrut's my favorite, and not because it's a cask, but because I've probably said on multiple occasions we will never bottle a port cask because I and I say it's port casks are 50-50. It's more like 90-10. 90 not good, 10% good. Port casks are so hit and miss for me that I never thought we would bottle a port cask. The other reason is, as you said, like as big as it is and as kind of rough as it is, it's got an elegance to it and a drinkability. And I think for that reason, it's my favorite whiskey in the lineup tonight. I think it shows really well. And as you mentioned as well, it's a 9-year-old. I mean, that's an ancient Amrut by any standard.
Amrut standards. Yeah. So for the crowd votes, first favorite of the night, Daftmill takes it with 15 votes, which is very, very cool. Second in the first is Amrut at 8, and then the G&M Glentauchers at 6. The boutique Teaninich didn't get any votes, but that's okay.
Got your vote, Evan. Got your vote.
It did. Yeah, and I mean that counts for 10, I think, in a democracy. So
definitely counts for something.
That's just fine. Second favorite of the night, Daftmill got the least amount of votes on that one because it was obviously first favorite. And then it was a pretty close run for the rest of them, a tie between Berries of Perspective, G&M's, Glentauchers, and Amrut at 7 votes each, and only followed closely by the Teaninich at 6.
Yeah,
pretty good spread there.
Yeah, I'd say so. And clearly everybody found something to like with some of these drams. So that's pretty cool when you see things like that come across. I suppose what we should do now, because Evan and I do need to run in a bit because we got to do another one of these tastings in 30 minutes, is does anyone have any questions or anything they want to ask us maybe before we wrap and go on to round 2 tonight? Evan, while we're waiting to see if people type in questions or not, We have a new bourbon cask coming in a couple weeks.
Yeah, so we've been waiting for it for a while. We do have a single cask bourbon KWM pick, Harmony in my pick actually, from our time tripping down to Washington to visit Doc Swinson's on Distiller's Way. It's a 6.5-year-old bourbon. We are super excited to get it in. Should be here in 1 or 2 weeks. I'll have pre-ordering up for that soon. But yeah, keep an eye out for that. And I think that'll probably be our last KWM cask of 2023.
Yeah, I mean, there's some things here that we're not going to release till next year. We've started teasing this out, although you won't see an image of it possibly until the day of. But we've got a door crasher bottling coming for February 11th to mark the anniversary of the infamous Dodge Ram incident. We're not going to share the label on that one though, because it's a surprise until February 11th. So that's coming. And well, it's here. A few people in Calgary got to try it at a tasting a couple weeks back, but I didn't let them take a photo of the label. And we do have some other casks coming. We've got some Gordon MacPhail casks coming next year. We've got an Ardmore and a second Glentauchers, a much older Glentauchers. And the Ardmore is another interesting one because it's another cask that I never thought we would do because I'm not a huge fan of Ardmore most of the time. But yeah, there's definitely some things to look forward to. We've got a Loch Lomond cask coming. That's probably a ways away. There's always a few little projects, little irons in the fire. I'm sure there's some other stuff coming too. Not remember.
Yeah, I think what we're gonna have to do is stop saying that we'll never bottle something because we're at like 160 KWM casks in at this point, and it's not a monkeys and typewriters thing necessarily, but there's always a good cask of something out there.
Safe to say we won't be bottling a Pappy Van Winkle anytime soon. So
that's right. That's right.
That's one that and we've already bottled Pappy Van Springbank a couple times. So if that never happens again, at least we had the two.
That's right.
But yeah, well, thanks for the comments, everybody. Peter and his wife, it's their date night in December, so glad to see they're still enjoying it again. Happy to see you're all enjoying the calendar so far. We're really kind of happy to see how it's been received. I know it's not as much volume as the past years, but we really feel we upped the value coefficient and the quality on it. So I hope you'll continue to see that over the next couple of weeks. But until Sunday night, slange everybody. Have a great night. Be well. Don't catch COVID. I don't recommend it. Even though I didn't lose my taste buds this time. And we'll see you Sunday night.
Cheers, everybody.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Take care.